Welcome, everyone. Let's get started. So we are very excited to have here with us today Anamaria Loya, Executive Director of La Raza Centro Legal. Before I introduce her, I want to thank Rachel Chodro-Reich for bringing La Raza here to Google. Anamaria was born in Indio, California, and since then she has been exposed to the challenges of the working class and the most needy people. She got her inspiration for social justice from her parents, who were both in this area. She attended UC Berkeley Law School, and before joining La Raza, she has a great track record of fighting for civil rights and social advocacy. La Raza Centro Legal is celebrating the 35th year this year in a couple of weeks. That's right. So make sure to congratulate them in advance. And it's quite impressive. So far, they've helped over 100,000 people become citizens. They help about 12,000 people each year. And their mission is making sure that the most needy people have access to great legal representation in their struggles. So, Anamaria, welcome to Google.
Thank you. Yay! Well, thank you so much. It's so great to be invited to speak with you all, and it's such a treat for me and an honor to be invited to the Google campus, so I'm so happy to be here. I want to tell you a little bit about La Raza Centro Legal before I start my talk. La Raza Centro Legal is a nonprofit legal services agency located in the Mission District of San Francisco. But we're so unique because we really focus our energy on thinking how creatively and how fiercely can we advocate for people's rights. We really want people who are the poorest of the poor, homeless folks, people living under the bridges, day laborers who stand on the street looking for work. We want those guys to have access to the absolute best, highest quality lawyer that they can have when they walk into our doors. And then on top of that, because the law itself is not necessarily the most just system, on top of that, how can we be as creative as possible when the law isn't working in our favor to empower and strengthen and build the leadership of our community? So we really combine leadership development, grassroots organizing, and high quality legal representation when we're helping people who walk in our doors. It's an honor and it's really exciting to do this kind of work. And I also want to say that I'm not by trade an immigration lawyer. I'm a lawyer, I'm a civil rights lawyer, but my technical field of expertise is not immigration. I supervise people who that's their field of expertise, but my expertise is the civil rights issues, and what I want to talk about today are what are some of the things that immigrants are facing, especially low-income immigrants in our communities, and what was all the hoopla, what was all that debate that happened a few years ago in Congress, and what actually did get passed, because things did get passed out of Congress, and what is currently being debated around immigrant rights. A little bit about what our candidates think about immigration issues. Where is Hillary and Obama and McCain on some of these issues? And then I want to talk a little bit about what we do. What are some of our creative ways of, in an environment that sometimes is very hostile to immigrants, what are the creative ways that we come up with to promote and advocate for immigrant rights? I want to share with you those things. And I want to leave some time in case there's questions. And also feel free to interrupt me if you have questions. So I want this to be a give and take. And so I'm going to be very brief because these are a lot of things to talk about in a brief period of time. And I have my faithful timekeepers up here helping me out, so that's great. So first of all, what are some of the issues facing immigrants today, especially low-income immigrants? It's nothing particularly unusual or rare. Immigrants, like and some of you are immigrants. Immigrants are just like anybody else, right? People are worried about paying the rent. They're worried about their children's performance in schools. They want to make sure they have a decent paying job. Some people are worried about their family back home. Those are like all normal things that all of us have in our lives that we're concerned about. There are some unique challenges that face low-income immigrants, and especially people who are here without documents. Undocumented immigrants have incredible and unique challenges. One of the things that is happening in the Bay Area, actually it's happening nationwide, but it is happening in our Bay Areas. There's a huge increase in raids and enforcement. There's a huge increase in the presence of the Immigration Service going to Home Depots and picking up day laborers and deporting them, of going to different work sites and targeting people. And so a thing that, a present issue that low-income immigrants who have undocumented members in their family or who themselves are undocumented are experiencing is this high pressure and this high fear about the increased enforcement. And also the anxiety around the lack of immigration reform, the anxiety around this frustration of wanting to enter some pathway to legalization and being frustrated that there's not a lot of options for a lot of people. Let me give you just a simple example of what those raids look like. Very recently, we got some panicky phone calls from a region in the Bay Area near San Francisco, a town called Windsor. Someone was banging on the door at 3 in the morning. The 12-year-old in the family is a citizen, and her parents are here and they don't have papers. They're undocumented. At 3 in the morning, they got someone's banging on their front door. She looked out the window, and it's people dressed in uniforms that say law enforcement. So she called. She actually had the home phone number of a school counselor who has been encouraging her to become college prep. And I heard this story from her counselor. She called her school counselor at 3 in the morning at home. And the school counselor wisely told her, you don't have to let anyone in your house, even law enforcement, unless they have a warrant. And you make sure that they show you that warrant. So her parents who don't speak English she was the one negotiating with the people banging on the front door at 3 in the morning. So at 3 in the morning, she's telling these people with her counselor on the phone, do you have a warrant? And they say, we don't have to show you any stinking warrant. And they burst the door open. They round up the family. She was living there with her uncles, her aunts, and her mom and dad. Her mom and dad were undocumented. One of her uncles is a legal permanent resident, and the rest of the family also did not have papers. So everyone was taken in, including the little girl. Excuse me, I'm recovering from a cold. And several of those family members signed voluntary departures while they were in custody, so they were deported that same evening. The counselor was traumatized and devastated. The little girl is traumatized and devastated. This is the type of calls that we get, and these are the type of clients that we face. Another example I can give you is I went to San Diego recently and talked to some folks about they're trying to create a sanctuary law in San Diego. So I talked to some people there about what that law might look like for them and how it works in San Francisco. And I'll talk a little bit about our sanctuary law in San Francisco in a moment. But I met somebody who is an undocumented immigrant in this country who was studying medicine, but he decided to stop studying medicine. He was getting really good grades. He wanted to go into medical school. He was doing all the right things, but he's not here legally. And for him, it felt like a waste of time. It felt like, he could keep pursuing this medical thing, but without papers, he's not going to be able to practice as a doctor in this country. So he decided to he was asking me advice about what type of careers could he maybe be, independent contractor, how could he maybe start some business, what should he be learning? But these are kind of like the concerns that exist in many immigrant families. I think what a lot of people also don't realize is that many immigrant families are mixed families. There are citizens in those families. There are people who are legally permanent legal permanent residents in those families, and there are undocumented immigrants in those families. And so that the issues that impact undocumented immigrants also impact lots of other folks. So let me just touch on a little bit, what was that whole debate about? Why were millions of Latinos and others taking to the streets in LA and San Francisco and Chicago and San Jose? What was going on? I'll talk a little bit about that, and then what really did get passed out of all of that debate. Several years ago, Congressman Sensenbrenner, drafted a law and effectively had this law passed. It passed the House of Representatives, and it was an incredibly punitive and horrific law. The law said that it was a felony to be in this country undocumented, and it was a felony to provide any shelter, food, or any services to someone who is undocumented, and that it provided also for funding to create a 700-mile fence on the U.S.-Mexico border, and it created funding to increase border and interior enforcement. So it was such a harsh and punitive law that it really freaked people out. And what really freaked people out about it was that it passed. It passed the House of Representatives. And so it was that version that then was at some point being debated in the Senate. And then McCain and Kennedy came up with a much softer version of immigration reform that was also being debated in the Senate. But when Sensenbrenner's bill passed, it freaked people out, and people took to the streets like, this cannot be. And let me share with you that is really actually nothing necessarily new. Our country has a long, long history of having a love-hate relationship with our immigrant communities. We have a long history of really needing immigrant workers. We have a long history of a huge period of our country's history where the U.S.-Mexico border was fluid. There was no one working that border. People came and went as they wanted. There's a huge history of people traveling throughout the Americas, traveling throughout Canada, without all of this hoopla and border patrol. And there's also a lot of history of this country getting disenchanted with immigrants and turning on them. There's history of when immigrant workers in the 30s were organizing and had a lettuce strike, that all of a sudden there was some anti-immigrant sentiment around immigrants. And when cotton workers started to organize, again, building of anti-immigrant sentiment. When there was a grape strike, there wasn't just police enforcement on those picket lines. Border Patrol were brought in to deal with those picket lines. And then our immigration policy also has been like a love-hate relationship depending on which country you're from. So it's always been very linked to U.S. foreign policy. So that if we're angry and furious with Cuba for being a communist country, then if you're a refugee from Cuba and you're fleeing Cuba, well, welcome, it's okay. I mean, that's like putting it like very non-technically, but generally more open arms for people from countries that we're fighting with who are saying they're fleeing. But if we're friends or allies with a country that is abusing or are going through a civil war, or we're supporting the country that people are fleeing from, our doors are not open to them. For example, Salvadoran refugees during the Salvadoran Civil War were not welcome in this country. And it was very hard for those people to prove that they needed to flee for political asylum. And it was much easier for people coming from Cuba to prove that they were fleeing and needed asylum. And then we've also used Jim Crow laws to kind of monitor and control immigrant populations. Similar like in the Deep South that had the whites and colored, signs. Throughout the Southwest, there were signs that said, no Mexicans, no dogs. There were signs that used to say, no Filipinos, no dogs. We have a history of having these really harsh ways that we treated people that were coming into our country. lately, clearly we don't have those kind of Jim Crow laws anymore, but some of our laws are, I would argue, are subtler forms of Jim Crow. Some of the laws are, you can come to this country, but we're going to make it really, really hard for you to be a full-fledged human being here. We're going to change the rules so that it's much harder to get your legal status here. Whereas maybe 20 years ago, you would have qualified to apply for citizenship, now you won't. So over the last few decades, we have been harshening and tightening up our immigration laws so that it's very, very challenging for people who find themselves undocumented to qualify for anything that's a pathway to legalization. And that whole debate in Congress was trying to deal with that there are 12 million people supposedly living in this country undocumented, and what are we going to do about them? Are we going to create some way for them to be legal? Are we going to somehow search every corner and kick everybody out? What are we going to do? So that was what that debate was about. And Kennedy and McCain were proposing also increased border enforcement, but they were also proposing some pathways to citizenship, and they were also proposing a guest worker program. None of those things passed both houses. So ultimately, the Sensenbrenner bill didn't make it through the Senate, and the Kennedy-McCain bill also did not make it through. And so what ended up passing? Well, there were bills going through Congress, and what did get attached during that time was increased funding to build a fence. So while it wasn't labeled comprehensive immigration reform, funding was allocated to begin building a fence along the US-Mexico border. Funding was allocated to increase inland enforcement. So not just along the border, but inland, like in San Francisco and deep in the Midwest, to increase the immigration enforcement. And then other things have been being proposed. Changes to the Social Security rules so that when the Social Security, when an employer finds out that an employee's Social Security number doesn't match, some proposals that would force that employer to have to really do an investigation, or possibly that would incentives for that employer to fire those employees. Trying to kind of increase the punishments or increase the penalties for possibly hiring or having undocumented immigrants work with you. And right now, there's all kinds of things being proposed at regional levels. In some counties in this country, it's illegal for a landlord to rent an apartment to someone that they suspect is undocumented. In some counties in this country, it's illegal to be undocumented, and you can be jailed by the local police for being undocumented. In some places, the police are required to ask if you're a citizen or not, if you're here legally or not, for routine traffic stops, for routine police enforcement activity. And so there are places in this country that it's much harder to be an immigrant than other places. And as you can imagine, how do you know just by looking at somebody whether they're undocumented or not? As you can imagine, a lot of people kind of get swept up in that, and it's a wholesale permission for serious racial profiling. Where do our three major candidates stand on some of these issues? They're not actually that dramatically different, believe it or not, when it comes to immigration, and that's not terribly surprising, unfortunately. Especially during a presidential race when all's at stake, right? When the Democrats really want to win, they're not going to go way out there and have some radical immigration policy as part of their platform. It's not strategic. So they're not that dramatically different. All three candidates, McCain, Obama, Clinton, all voted for that funding for the fence along the US-Mexico border. Although now Clinton and Obama are kind of distancing themselves from that decision. All three are for increased border security and increased enforcement. And just to put a real life example or real life experience of what increased border enforcement means, it means it's really harder to enter this country. And people who are choosing to come into this country undocumented are at desperate are in desperate situation. It's not an easy or flippant choice. They're leaving their family, they're leaving people thousands of miles behind, they're separating themselves from their support network. Some of them are agreeing to go to a place where they're definitely going to be targeted and a second-class citizen, and where they're going to be doing hard work. And what it means is, for a lot of people, it means they're crossing deeper and deeper through the Arizona desert to try to get in, because they can't get, because the increased enforcement is pushing people farther into the desert. And year after year, the numbers of people dying of thirst and starvation in the desert trying to come into this country is increasing exponentially. So it's where there used to be only 100 border deaths years ago, now it's over 400 a year easily, just in the Arizona border trying to get in. People dying, and if you can imagine what that is to die of thirst, it's horrific. And the experience of coming across is horrific, but that's what that increased enforcement, when I hear those words, I get that it's politically strategic, but when I hear people saying that we want increased enforcement, I have to work with those people that did make it through, and the trauma that they're going through now that they're here, and healing them now that they're here so that they can support those families back home. It's brutal. With regard to guest worker program, Clinton voted against a guest worker program. She's against it because she says it would drive wages down, and both Obama and McCain are for it. With regard to legalization, all three have some ways of creating some pathways to legalization in their platforms. And with regard to driver's license for immigrants, Clinton is against it, Obama is for it, and McCain's against it. Just give you a little summary of where our candidates are on these issues. So what do we do at La Raza Centro Legal? Because I can tell you it is a harsh environment these days to be an advocate for immigrant rights. It is an anti-immigrant climate, I can easily say. If you go to Arizona, it is brutal in Arizona. Arizona is the new Old South. Arizona is the new Mississippi of the immigrant rights movement. The harshest and most brutal laws are being proposed in Arizona. The latest thing I read today was that Arizona is proposing outlawing any student groups that have any ethnic affiliation. So it would be illegal to have an African American student union. It would be illegal to have a MECHA, illegal to have an Asian American student union. It's just crazy. Like, I don't know what is wrong with the people who are voting in Arizona, because it's such a beautiful state and such a rich culture. There's so much indigenous heritage in that state, but man, they are coming up with some scary laws. So what are we doing? We're trying to come up with ways that are legal. We're lawyers, so we're suing. You know, we defend immigrants when they're being deported. When those INS banged down that door in Windsor, we challenged the lack of a warrant. We challenged the way they entered that room. But unfortunately, some of those family members were already gone. So the benefit of that challenge didn't help that family. We actually sue, we file lawsuits to try to keep some of these laws from being put in place. So when crazy places pass ridiculous laws, like in Arizona, when people are saying it's a felony for a landlord to rent to someone that they suspect is undocumented, we sue because we think that that's crazy, and we try to challenge those ordinances. Here in San Mateo, nearby in San Mateo, there's an ordinance that is targeting day laborers. So the day laborers that stand on the street trying to get work in San Mateo, the ordinance is cleverly crafted so that it's not the day laborer that's being ticketed, it's the employer that's being ticketed. Or the day laborer is being ticketed for trespassing, for jaywalking by stepping off the curb where they're not supposed to. So what clever lawyers are doing is all of those day laborers taking every single one of those cases to trial. So make sure it's a full jury trial, and we're going to argue this whole thing out. Did this poor guy who's just simply trying to friggin' find a job, you know, is he violating some horrific law? And is San Mateo really going to go after these guys? So the lawyer who's taking those cases is actually getting not guilty verdicts on behalf of day laborers, and really putting that city in like a bind, like they have this law they're trying to enforce and they can't win in court. So we're doing things like that. We're also trying to create laws that help create an environment that people feel safe and protected in. So in San Francisco is a sanctuary city, and we're trying to create more of a sanctuary movement so that there are sanctuary cities throughout the country. And as a sanctuary city in San Francisco, the police are not allowed to ask, what is your immigration status? So that if you're a woman and you are experiencing domestic violence, but you're undocumented, you can still call the cops in San Francisco and they're not going to ask you about your immigration status. Or if you've been the victim of a crime, you can still call the cops in San Francisco and they're not supposed to ask you those things. You can go to the hospital and your social security number is not a question at the hospital. You can go to the schools, you can use all the city services. And now we're exploring trying to spread that so that anyone who contracts with the city shouldn't be allowed to be asking those questions. We really want the whole city to have the atmosphere of immigrants. This is an immigrant safe city. And we're trying to help other cities pass those type of ordinances or educate other cities about the benefit of it. It's simple, good public policy. You want people to be able to use your law enforcement. You don't want this whole class of people to be too afraid to report crimes. What are other strategies that we're doing? We are organizing so that, and this to me is like the most exciting part, we are working with undocumented immigrants. We are talking to folks who are day laborers, to women who are domestic workers, and asking, what kind of immigration reform do you need and do you want? What do you want your city to provide you? What do you want the state to provide, and what do you want to demand of this country? And we want to make sure those voices are heard. We want to make sure that when we as an agency take our stand around what is immigrant rights, or what is our stand on guest worker program, are we for it or are we against it? Well, we ask day laborers and domestic workers, well, where should we be on that issue? What do you think our stand should be? And then we articulate whatever it is that our community says about that. So it's with the leadership of undocumented immigrants that we're actually able to get things passed at the local level that support the rights of immigrants. We're actually able to get, for example, in the city of San Francisco, a whole marketing campaign so that everybody knows, everybody has like clear understanding that it's a sanctuary city, and that the demand for that whole like effort and that push around marketing and advertising the sanctuary city was demanded by undocumented immigrants. With us creating meeting spaces where they can meet, with us making sure there's like food for when they meet, for us getting like good allies, great allies like my friend Eric here, or other folks to take care of the kids while the domestic workers meet about what it is that they want. We're organizing immigrants to stand together so that they're not targeted so easily. So for example, we're working with day laborers so that they declare for themselves what's their minimum wage going to be, so that every corner in San Francisco where day laborers are standing, there is not some guy going out for $5 an hour. We're organizing corner by corner so that this corner, you cannot get a worker for less than 20 bucks an hour. And we're organizing all up and down the street so that day laborers have a minimum wage that is at least semi-dignified. And then we're organizing workers, hey, you have a little bit more skill? Well, your wage should be higher. So we're like helping workers like assert their rights in a way that they would have access to if they were part of a formal union. We're helping workers demand those kind of rights. We're working with domestic workers nationally so that Spanish-speaking women who clean people's houses in San Francisco are going to a conference to meet with Spanish-speaking and Chinese-speaking women in New York who clean people's houses, who are also hooking up with women from New Orleans, who are hooking up from women from LA, so that together, nationally, they can talk about employment laws and whether the laws serve them. And it's not just lawyers who represent domestic workers going to these conferences. No, we're like figuring out how to get domestic workers to a conference to talk about that stuff. And then we have to go through all the challenge about, okay, if some of these domestic workers are undocumented, how are we going to get them from San Francisco to New York? Okay, is it going to be a Greyhound? Are we going to have to rent a van? We're going to talk, where's ICE activity happening? Where is there more immigration enforcement? And what's the path to get there? I mean, literally like building underground railroads of immigrant support so that undocumented immigrants have access to what they want, so they can organize, so they can start asserting their voice in this country and not be this hidden underground that people in Congress are debating about as a problem to try to solve. Then we're doing things that have a lot to do with services. You know, like how we're all supposed to have our earthquake emergency plan, right? You're all supposed to have it. I don't know if you do, that emergency thing of water in your house and the phone numbers, right? We're all supposed to do that. Some of us haven't done it. Well, we're helping immigrant families have their RAID emergency plan, because that's a reality that our community unfortunately faces. Who's going to pick up the kids if there's a raid at the parents' work site? Does the neighbor know? Does the school know who to call if the parents disappear from one day to the next? Where is that family going to live if one of the breadwinners is deported? Is there an emergency place? Is there another friend that can put them up for a while? Doing all that kind of training. We're doing lots of preparedness, like prevention training, really helping immigrants learn their simple rights, like I have the right to remain silent. It's none of your damn business where I was born, you know? And I want to talk to a lawyer now. And I can tell you, you know, in San Francisco, we run the day labor program there. And we did a mock raid, so that the men would, after we had done a Know Your Rights, we had a dear white friend show up and ask them, hey, where are you from? And the poor guys, after having done the training with us, oh, I'm from Mexico, not have any papers. I'm like, no, that's not what you're supposed to do. So, okay, it was a miserable failure. Like the majority of our workers gave themselves up. So then just 1 week later, wasn't even that much later, we did it again. And we're like, this time these guys are 100%, they're gonna do it right. No, still. They were like so intimidated, like, oh, I don't have any papers. So the biggest evidence that the INS gets from undocumented immigrants comes out of their mouths. And INS will tell you this, or I call them INS, they're now called ICE. ICE will tell you this, that the best evidence they get is out of the mouths of immigrants. So it's like, for me, it's like the best preventative measure. Don't talk, don't tell them. Wait for a lawyer, let us help you. So the second time, a little bit better, but still the majority gave themselves up. Finally, the third time, and by this time I know the guys know, okay, it's another friggin' drill. This guy's not with the INS, but they all did the right thing. They're all like, I reserve the right to remain silent. I want my lawyer. Let me call it Raza Centro Legal. So we're also printing out little cards that say in Spanish and in English, but in English for them to hand to the ICE officer, I reserve the right to remain silent. This is my lawyer's number. I want to call my lawyer, so that people have that. But these are challenging days, and I can honestly say that it's inspiring work when you are standing next to someone who cleans houses for a living. And she's telling you what kind of workers' comp laws they should be. That she's thought about it, she's got her opinion about it, she's pressuring you. Anamaria, we need this in San Francisco. If the state isn't gonna give me workers' comp, well, what can the city do? Because I breathe in these toxic fumes all day long as I'm cleaning people's houses. We need some workers' comp. It's just like, it's inspiring, it's beautiful, it's wonderful, wonderful work, and it gives me hope. It makes me know that despite the craziness that we live in, our country has been through crazy times before. We've been through, right, horrific laws, slavery, we've been through, like, Jim Crow, that we're going through some harsh times right now when it comes to this nation's perception of the foreigner, of the immigrant. It's bad, and yet there are movements all throughout the country of immigrants organizing to build their strength and to protect themselves and to ally with other immigrants and to create like those miracle spaces, those magical places where people are asserting their dignity and their humanity, and no, I'm not a second-class citizen, and no, I'm not illegal and undocumented, and I'm a human being. I'm come to this country and I'm trying to work and I'm trying to help my family. That's what I am. So we're creating that type of reality for the people in our communities, and it's really exciting and it's really wonderful. I don't know if there's any questions or any thoughts about what I've said, but I'm interested to hear what you all have to say. Yeah. Oh, I think they. Oh.
I heard that the federal government, I don't know if this is right, that a couple of weeks ago, that the federal government is discussing ignoring sanctuary cities.
Yeah.
Is that true? And can you talk about that? The other thing I wanted to ask you, 2 questions. Can you talk a little bit about, there's this myth that, undocumented workers just come here and they're here legally and then they want benefits and they go to the hospital and they go to the schools.
Yeah.
Can you talk about do you know how much taxes undocumented
Gladly.
immigrants pay? Because I know the employers have to take the taxes out of their checks, so it's not
right.
true that they don't pay anything. And I'd like to hear your comment. Thank you.
Yeah, so both questions. So the first one, and I have such bad short-term memory that remind me if I forget the second one, but the first one is that yes, the federal government, Congress has debated and has tried to propose laws over and over and over again that would penalize sanctuary cities. So it would mean try to pass laws where cities that declare themselves sanctuary cities would lose all their federal funding, or law enforcement agencies that refuse to cooperate with the INS would lose their federal funding. And for a city like San Francisco, that would be devastating. It would be, because we, like any other city, do receive federal funding, and we provide a lot of services in that town, and a lot of it comes from the federal government. So it would be devastating. So part of what we're trying to do is build a solid and strong enough movement that is politically unfeasible, that it cannot pass, that too many mayors and too many governors would not allow that to happen because there are too many sanctuary cities. And someone actually asked Hillary Clinton in an interview what she thought about it, and I haven't heard someone ask about it with Obama or with McCain, so I can't do a comparison, but they asked her, and she tried to dodge it because it's she's running for president and she didn't want to answer the question, but she ultimately said, those cities, those laws are necessary, those sanctuary laws. So people have to do what they got to do, is what she basically said. I think that there's still enough resistance to allowing something like that to pass that it wouldn't pass, but there have been those. More recently, there's an argument in Congress to try to force the IRS and the Social Security to share their databases with the INS, with the immigration. Because immigrants do pay taxes. That's what a lot of people maybe don't realize. They apply for their ITINs. It looks like a Social Security number, but it's not. And they use that number to pay their taxes. And in order to qualify for any kind of future reform or legalization, one of the things that as an immigrant you have to prove is that you've paid taxes over the years. And so I know in our day labor program we have a big push every tax season to help them make sure they have their ITINs, to make sure their forms are filed, to make sure they've filed their taxes. It's a huge thing. Undocumented immigrants, they file their tax forms. There are probably some that don't. I'm sure there are some and there's some non-immigrants that don't pay their taxes either, right? But there's a huge incentive for immigrants to pay their taxes, because if there's ever any hope of any door opening where they could legalize, they would need to prove that they've paid them. So they do pay them. And then a lot of immigrants who have regular and steady work, regular work, not this temporary work, casual work, but where they're like working as busboys, janitors, waiters, whatever, and it's regular work. I mean, taxes are being taken out of their checks. They're on somebody's payroll, and taxes are being removed. If they're using a number where they can't access those Social Security funds, then they can't access them ever. They're paying into something that they'll never benefit from. And then I guess the other question around immigrants using services, there's a lot of myth around that. But most public benefits that would be considered welfare, you can't access those as an undocumented immigrant. You're not eligible. So for federal benefits, you're not eligible. Some states and localities do allow undocumented immigrants, in particular children, to access some health care benefits and some food stamp benefits. But for the most part, immigrants are not eligible for a lot of those, including legal permanent residents aren't even eligible for a lot of public benefits. The laws have gotten so strict that they, in order to show that they can someday be a citizen on their own, even they have been barred from accessing many benefits that years ago they could. And then finally, on the issue of hospitals, someone did a study recently because the premise was that if immigrants aren't going to the doctor regularly, they're probably going to the emergency room, which is an expensive way to get medical care, as we all know. But the actual findings show that they're not even doing that. They're just simply not accessing medical services at all. And I can tell you from my experience working in San Francisco with day labor and domestic worker population, they do not go even to the emergency room. I've had workers trying to stand on Cesar Chavez Street in San Francisco looking for work with a broken arm. It amazes me. They will not access those services. So for us, actually for me, one of the hurdles in my work is to try to get them to access services, because for all of our health, we need everybody in the society accessing health services. It helps all of us be healthy. But definitely just from basic human dignity, people need access to those services. Yes?
Thank you. I have to say, as a Mexican, as someone who was born and raised in Mexico all of his life, it hurts to see how much our own people are being rejected and suffering here, just trying to look for a job and to make better with their lives. These are, I believe, very valuable and incredible people who, I don't know, it just hurts to see this. And I think the work that organizations like yours do, it's very valuable and it's great. Thank you for that. I believe also that there are probably other choices beyond lobbying the U.S. One of them being, for example, lobbying the home country to, become a richer country, to offer more opportunities to the people who have to leave and who have to go through all this, penance just to go by. And I believe that the immigrant community in the U.S., being as massive as it is now, and as rich as it is when compared to Mexico, and of course with other smaller countries, has a huge muscle that I don't think it's flexing back home. Do you consider, for example, going back home or lobbying political parties and the countries of Mexico and our countries, the governments of Mexico and our countries?
Yeah, it's really interesting that you bring that up. That there is slowly a movement building to organize Mexican citizens in the U.S. to influence the politics of Mexico. And so there are even, for example, in Michoacan, there's a representative in Michoacan who his constituency are the people in the exterior. So his constituency are the Michoacanos living outside of Mexico. That's who he's in charge of. So it's interesting. That's not everywhere in Mexico's legislatures, but in Michoacan, there's actually an elected official who doesn't have a local district. His district is the people who live in the U.S. That's his district. So it's amazing that's starting to happen. But I think there's a couple of things that need to happen. I do think that it is important to influence the politics back home and to create opportunity back home, because obviously people don't want to be forced to be separated from their families. And coming here illegally usually means that the whole family doesn't come together. It usually means that someone is martyring themselves, agreeing to be separate while everyone else stays behind, or they trickle over. So they're separated for long periods of time, and that's an awful and painful way to be in a family, I think. So there are things that people can, there is a movement to create change in Mexico, for example, around creating more opportunities so people don't have to do that. But it has a lot to do also with changes that need to happen in this country too, that influence Mexico. For example, some of the free trade agreements, I would argue, have created some of the migration into the US. When the US signed the NAFTA, and it completely disrupted whole ways of life in parts of Mexico. When it became okay for Monsanto to start growing Frankenstein corn, what do they call those? Those Frankenfoods, you know, to start growing weird corn in Mexico and compete with indigenous Chapanecos. It completely displaced almost an entire state. People, for all of a sudden, there's no mistake or no surprise or no coincidence that within a year of that free trade agreement being signed, Chapanecos started appearing in the United States on our street corners looking for work as day laborers. And it's no surprise that in San Francisco, it's interesting, there's a street where the majority of the Latinos standing on that street looking for work, Spanish isn't their first language. They are speaking an indigenous language. And when I walk by, the only word I recognize is licenciada. They recognize me. They'll be saying something and then they'll say licenciada. And then we try to communicate. But all of those people have been displaced, farmers, from our trade policies. So that changes need to be made in our policy, but shame on Mexico too for allowing that to happen, and for the government in Mexico for signing an agreement that is adverse to its own people. So yeah, I definitely agree with you that it's an international question and that it's not even a US question. I could be giving this talk in Italy. I wouldn't be the expert in it. I wouldn't be the one. But a talk like this could be given in Italy about the immigrants flowing into Italy and the economic situation in Italy, and should they be having the jobs and all. In France, there's a huge immigrant debate in France and in Germany and in England. You know, it's an international phenomenon. When I hear on NPR in the mornings that there was a bombing in Iraq, and 30-day laborers in Iraq were killed. It touches me in a unique way, because I think, there's like day laborers all over the friggin' world. There are displaced Iraqis trying to find jobs in Iraq right now, and they're standing on street corners looking for day labor. And they were just the victims of a bombing. And it reminds me that what I'm going through here in San Francisco where I'm at in San Francisco, is a universal phenomenon. And whatever strategies I'm trying to figure out how to help here, there are probably things that I could be studying. What are the people organizing in Brazil doing around their rights? And what are the people organizing in Chiapas doing? And in France, you know, what does the immigrant rights movement look like there? So there's a lot of things to learn, because yeah, it's a universal phenomenon. Uh-oh, I feel a coughing jab coming on.
So you know, I had a question along those same lines. So we hear about all these, you know, horrible things that are happening here with immigration and just the sentiment. I wanted to know if there's sort of a, you know, international ranking that just measures how different societies are receptive or not. Immigration, is that something that we can use to measure ourselves and just measure our progress? That's the first question. And second question, you do a lot of great work. Where do you get the money for it, and how do you broadly spend that money?
Eric, I might ask you to answer the money question. Maybe you could answer it first.
Sure. So,
well,
sure.
So before Eric starts, I'm going to pass around an email list if you want to get involved more. And I mean, don't leave, but we're not ending. But just so you can get involved partly in raising money and in other ways help out this organization. One of the exciting things that is happening coming up is their 35th anniversary. Rodrigo mentioned that. It's May 9th in 3 Fridays. It's going to be amazing. 2 Fridays. Well, not this one, not the next, the one after that. And so Eric will also tell you more about that. Thanks, all of you, for coming, by the way. And thank you so much for coming. It is amazing to
dealing with
have
the
you
cold,
here.
so I'll let you guys do that while I make the cough go
Thanks.
away.
Again, my name's Eric, and I came with Anamaria today, and I work with Raza Centro Legal. We receive funding from the government, from private foundations, and also from individuals and corporations like Google. We haven't yet received money from Google, but we hope that we will. Most of our direct service work operating the San Francisco Day Labor Program, providing direct legal services to people in San Francisco and a little bit in San Mateo and Contra Costa counties are through contracts with city and county governments. About 60 to 65%. About 35% come from private foundations. They support our organizing and advocacy work and some of our service work as well. And then the remainder comes from corporations and from individuals. And as Rachel said, actually, we're this year celebrating our 35th anniversary. It's already been mentioned. And our biggest fundraiser of the year in terms of both corporate and individual fundraising is on Friday, May 9th. And we'd love for you to join us. Sure. I'll just take a brief minute to tell you a little bit more about the event. The event will be in San Francisco at St. Mary's Cathedral, not too far from downtown. And we are honoring the founders of Raza Centro Legal, who founded the agency 35 years ago. And actually, the history of the agency is really impressive and moving. It came out of a previous era of organizing for civil rights. The 60s and 70s, the Chicano movement was, and the farm worker movement were very powerful here in California and San Francisco, and so Raza Centro Legal was founded in that context. And so we're honoring the 4 individuals who founded the agency then. We're also honoring the San Francisco public defender, Jeff Adachi, who has been a tremendous ally to us, a tremendous ally to the immigrant community, to low-income communities in San Francisco. And we have a nationally recognized spoken word artist and author named Paul Flores as our master of ceremonies, and our Coro Honolero, which is a chorus that we actually just began with support from the San Francisco Arts Commission of entirely day laborers and domestic workers. We'll be making their world premiere at our event as well. So it should be a great event. We'd love for you to join us. And yeah, that's it. I have some invitations here for those that are interested in attending.
Thanks,
and,
Eric.
If you want to.
So I'm okay now.
Okay.
No, I'm all mic'd up.
Okay.
I was teasing Eric that I was going to make him give the speech because I'd be coughing. So you had to give the commercial break. I don't know who would win the prize of the best country or the worst country. I actually don't know that, but I imagine that we're definitely not up there in terms of the best. Especially after 9/11 and the way we treated, Arab, Muslim, or anyone we even thought was Arab, Muslim, the way we treat Latinos and the way we treat immigrants in general. We're clearly not up there in terms of the best country. And then, one thing about our funding that is a little bit funny, I think, is that some of the funding that supports some of the work we do with day laborers does come from the federal government. Under the Bush administration, I just like it. To me, it's just rebellious. Be in office and do all that horrible thing you're doing, but help out these poor day laborers. They're part of they're a consequence of your horrible policies. So yeah, you should pay for them, but we do get some health funding to support the health and well-being of day laborers, and we do a lot of health work with day laborers with federal money, which is a little bit funny. Yeah.
I just wanted to throw in one thing, also that the reality obviously also is that the federal government and city governments are, in major debt, so there's a significant scaling back of funding for things like legal services for local people and immigrants. turn into other sectors of the community to support our work.
Thanks, Eric. I'm going to say what you're saying, but on mic because other people can't hear you. So Eric's saying that, obviously, like if you turn on the news, everyone is saying, yeah, there's no money, cities are going bankrupt, the state is broke, federal government is broke, has spent all its money on ridiculous things. And so, yeah, we're trying to be smart. And so we're expanding our reach in as many different places that can support us as possible so that we're not depending on things. Like, I don't want to be depending on a federal government to support day labor services. If they have funding to support it, heck yeah, I'll go for it. But I definitely don't want to be dependent on it because one of the things about the work that we do is it is rebellious work. We do tend to anger politicians sometimes with the way that we do our jobs because we're standing up for people who are very unpopular, and we're doing it fearlessly and we're doing it uncompromisingly. Just like there's no compromise. Day laborers have a right to be full-fledged human beings. Undocumented immigrants have a right to be full-fledged human beings. They should be able to friggin' drive to work. They shouldn't have to not have driver's licenses. They should be able to have all the benefits that everyone else has on the job. They should have health insurance, all of those things. So yeah, we're uncompromising on that, and so we tend to piss people off. Yeah.
Hi, you mentioned that in addition to all of the advocacy and everything else that you're doing, you also do take certain cases to court. Mm-hmm. And I was wondering, I imagine there's a huge amount of demand for your services. And I was wondering what your criteria are, or what, I imagine you do it to take a particularly strong stand against those laws which are such flagrant violators of human rights. So I was wondering what your criteria are, or how you choose which cases to litigate.
It's really hard because, sometimes the line to get into our office is long. So we do a lot of different things. We make sure we partner with lots of private law firms and with big civil rights agencies. And we do find good cases that would make good law, that feel strategic. And on those cases, we make sure we're partnering with someone in a private law firm or in a civil rights agency, because what we also want to do is be the one-on-one lawyer for all the small little cases that come by. So we take on tons of cases that are small types of cases that someone else wouldn't take. An example, a day laborer is owed $5,000. A very common scenario is that someone will work for an employer, a day laborer, and the employer will say, I've got work for you for 5 days, and I'll pay you on day 5, and I'll pick you up on this street corner every day at 9 a.m. So the employer shows up, picks up the worker, they work, and on day 5, the employer doesn't show. So the guy just gave away 4 days of labor for nothing, didn't get a penny. It's horrific. So we train, and we do lots of training so that people can identify those employers. We have day laborers write down license plates, and we do all this stuff. The coroner's got to be organized so that they know who that employer is, and everybody, and we sue those people. And we train day laborers to learn how to negotiate those lawsuits, so that we run a clinic that has a combination of lawyers, sometimes law students learning how to practice the law, and then what look like law students, but they're actually day laborers, filling up our office with clients in front of them telling them their case. And then when those clients leave, all that team gets together and strategize about which cases have merit, which ones should we take, which ones are going to need to go the legal route, which ones will picket in front of that employer's home, get the payment made, which ones is just simply a phone call will resolve it, which ones are they don't have merit, how can we help this poor brother out, but he doesn't have a case. We do all of that. But the beauty of it is that the legal team is comprised of lawyers, law students, legal assistants, and day laborers who are actually technically legal assistants, highly trained, who have gone through our leadership development programs that we offer. But so the way that we help meet the need is we really firmly believe in demystifying the law. We really firmly believe in helping people develop the skills to help themselves. And I get, and we get, I'm committed, I get that law is a licensed art and that can't have people practicing law without a license. So, but we use all our resources possible, including the faith in the very people that need those services, that they probably have the intelligence and the capability to learn how to do what I know how to do. I just had, different experiences in life and benefits and privileges. But so it's exciting to see a day laborer, a guy who literally is like cleaning someone's garden because he got that job that day on Cesar Chavez Street, and that night is on the phone with an employer saying, no, the law is this, sir, and you do owe my client this much money, and I'm representing La Raza Centro Legal, and I'm the legal assistant to so-and-so, and pay up. It's beautiful. It's really beautiful. That's how we do it. So we strategize. The bigger cases that are going to suck up a lot of resources, we really try to use private resources to do that. So we have great partners in private law firms that, these are great opportunities for them to take interesting work. So they partner with us on those cases. And these smaller ones, we're fierce. Like I like to say, Donald Trump probably has his pick of who is the best lawyer that he wants, that he feels good with. I want a day laborer to walk in and have that feeling that they have the best lawyer on their side, the best that money could buy when they come into our office. Any other questions? Yeah.
I had to step away for a minute, so I may have missed this if someone else asked it, but if we're Spanish speakers, or even if we're not, is there something that we can do on a kind of voluntary basis?
Totally.
I mean, done some things using my Spanish skills, but love to put them to work more.
Absolutely. Yeah. We have so much opportunity for volunteerism at our agency. Our offices are full a lot of the time, and a lot of those people are volunteers. So we have people who all you need to do is just contact me, quite frankly, 415-553-3429, and I'll hook you up. But we have tons of opportunities. You can help teach day laborers or domestic workers how to speak English. You could help babysit their kids while the women meet. You could help learn to be a legal assistant and volunteer on a Tuesday night clinic with other day laborers who are legal assistants. You could help prepare the sandwiches for the big march on May 1. There's like so many things that we use volunteers for. You're more than welcome to come. It's 415-553-3429.
So I have all of their contact information and definitely will give it to you as well. And please, if you haven't signed your information so they can contact you, that'd be great if you could do that. We have also information about the organization here, which also has the number on it that you can take before you go. And again, there are invitations here for their 35th anniversary dinner. I'd love it if you all want to come. I'd love to host a table of Googlers, which would be amazing.
Yeah,
bring your
that would be
friends
so
and
fun.
family. So definitely take
We're
one of
gonna
these
have tequila
and talk
tasting.
to me. Yeah, it should definitely be an amazing evening.
So one other perhaps obvious way that y'all can support is actually, and I was talking to Rachel a little bit about this, any technology or web support that any individuals or the company can provide would be much appreciated. We're definitely, as you can imagine, as a community organization, pretty under-resourced in the technology department. And so any work that we can do to make our work more efficient and make our attorneys and organizers and members more effective in their work would be much appreciated.
That includes getting them on Google Apps, getting them Google Grants, getting them on Google Checkout, which we can do for them as a nonprofit for free, all of these things. And also website design and help would be great.
Cool.
Any other questions?
Thanks, everybody.